This screencast is going to help you prepare for the important Year 1 A-Level Sociology end-of-year exam. And as you can see from this slide, there are 4 sections to the end-of-year exam covering all of the topics that we've been working on since the beginning of the academic year in September. And you can see that, like the real exams at the end of the second year, this is a long paper. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes in total, so that we're preparing you for the length of time in the real exams. Now, for A-Level Sociology, there are 3 assessment objectives. And what I mean by assessment objectives are the things that examiners are looking for when they mark your work. So firstly, they're looking for knowledge and understanding, and in particular, they expect you to know about key sociological theories, key concepts, that's all the specialist jargon and terminology that you should have been learning regularly through Memrise and Brainscape, and also evidence, that's reference to studies, named sociologists, key examples. And you also need knowledge of the main ways in which sociologists do their research, their main research methods. AO2 is about application, and really the key skill in terms of application is your ability to apply your sociological knowledge directly to the question set. And then finally, assessment objective 3, which is particularly important for the longer essay style questions, is about analysis and evaluation. So this is about your ability to go beyond description and to actually present arguments in a clear and logical way, but also a critical way. So evaluation in particular is your ability to make critical judgments about the quality of the arguments and evidence that you're presenting and to draw relevant conclusions. The first section of the exam, section A, covers the component work 1 that we did early on in the course to do with the concepts of culture, socialisation, social control and identity. So these are the key areas that you need to revise for the first section. So the first section of the paper, section A, will be laid out like this. You'll be given a short bit of text to read, that's called the item, and then you've got 2 questions. You've got a 5-mark question and a 15-mark question, and I recommend that you spend 25 minutes on this section of the paper altogether. Now, in terms of technique for section A at the end of year exam, if you go back to this particular screencast that you should have watched in preparation for the January mock exam, what I do in this particular video is go through in lots of detail with examples of real pieces of work the technique that you need to display for this section of the exam. So if you select this particular playlist from my YouTube channel, A-Level Component 1, the building blocks, and you go right to the bottom of this particular playlist, you can find that video. Now, the second section to the end of year exam, section B, focuses on the topic of youth cultures, and on this section of the exam there will be 1 question that you have to do, a 15-mark question, and I recommend that you spend around about 20 minutes of your allotted time on this section of the exam. Now, this question is really about knowledge and application. It's not a question that requires you to display the skill of evaluation. It's a straightforward test of your ability to write a clear explanation of an idea or reasons for a particular feature of youth cultures. And in a nutshell, examiners are looking for 3 things from your answer. They're looking for breadth. What I mean by this is you've got to make a minimum of 3 points. They're also looking for depth. So for each point that you identify, it has to be fully developed and explained, and you have to make direct reference to key bits of sociological knowledge, so supporting studies, key sociologists, use of key terminology, and use of theories where appropriate. And it's got to be relevant. Every point has got to be explicitly related to the question set. So once again, it's breadth, depth, and relevance that examiners are looking for. And for this section of the exam, you need to revise all of the screencasts that we've covered on youth cultures up to and including the one on gender and youth cultures. What you can see on this slide is a suggested structure for the 15-mark youth culture question. So in the first paragraph you can briefly define any of the key terms that are used in the question, and then in the main body of your answer you need to be making at least 3 points. Each of those points needs to be fully explained, and as I mentioned earlier, you need to make sure that your explanation contains sociological knowledge of key terms, evidence and where relevant theory, and you need to make sure that there's a sentence in each paragraph that clearly relates your knowledge directly to the question set. So as I said, in terms of breadth, a minimum of 3 points, but if you've got the time then you might also want to make a 4th point. However, it's much better to make just 3 or 4 points that are fully developed and explained than half a dozen or more points that are not developed. Now what you can see on the screen at the moment is the beginning of an answer to this particular question, outline and explain why some young people belong to youth cultures, and I want you just to hit the pause button and read through this particular paragraph. So hit the pause button now. Now this has got a really nice paragraph structure. If we take the first sentence clearly relates back to the question set, and also it identifies the point that's going to be discussed in the rest of the paragraph, this idea that young people belong to youth cultures because they see them as a collective solution to the problems that young people experience in society. Now the rest of the paragraph really develops and explains that point much more fully, drawing upon some relevant theory, in this case the functionalist perspective, and also we've got reference to some key sociologists, Eisenstadt and Parsons, that we would associate with this particular theory. And this is the rest of the student's answer to the question that we saw on the previous slide. So once again, if you hit the pause button and have a read through each of these paragraphs, you should see that they follow a really nice structure where there's a point clearly identified, linked to the question set, and then developed and explained with lots of relevant sociological knowledge. The third section of the end of year sociology exam focuses on the media topic, and here you'll have one 35-mark question to do from a choice of 2, and you'll need to spend about 45 minutes on this section of the exam. And for this section of the exam, you will need to revise all of the work that we've done on media sociology up to and including the 2 screencasts on media representations of ethnicity. Now a 35-mark question is really a longer essay style question, and there are 3 main types of essay questions that examiners tend to ask in sociology exams, but for the purposes of the end of year exam, both of the 35-mark questions will be questions that ask you to evaluate a claim. So both of the 35-mark questions that you choose from in this section of the exam will have a viewpoint, and you have to weigh up the arguments for and against that particular viewpoint. Now for these types of longer essay questions, I suggest that you adopt this 4-part essay structure. So section 1 is your introduction, and then sections 2 and 3 are the main body of your essay. And here you've got to evaluate the arguments and evidence that support the claim, then you've got to look at the arguments and evidence that go against the claim, and then you've got to draw a conclusion. And here are some examples of these types of longer questions that you find for the media section. One simple way of visualizing this essay structure is to imagine your essay question being structured like an X-ray picture of a fish. So the head represents the introduction, the 2 sets of bones are a reminder that you've got to look at both the arguments for and against the claim, the spine is making sure that you link each of your arguments back to the claim in the question, and the tail represents the conclusion. So part 1 of your essay is the introduction. This only needs to be 1 short paragraph, and I suggest that you practice writing introductions using one of these templates. So if we take the first of the templates or writing frames for introductions that I showed you on the previous slide, this particular one, we can see how we can apply it to an introduction for this question: assess the view that the content of the media reflects the views of its owners. And you can hopefully see how I've just adapted this particular writing framework to construct this particular introduction. So I've just used these kind of words and phrases to help me introduce this particular essay question concisely at the beginning of this particular answer. And here's a similar type of essay question, but this time the emphasis is on the media reflecting the views of its audience, and you can see that once again I've just used this particular essay writing framework for introductions in order to very quickly construct an effective introduction to this particular question. Then we move on to the main body of the essay, where you're going to look at the arguments and evidence both in support of the claim, but also arguments and evidence that would criticise or challenge the claim in the question. Now, in the main body of your 35-mark answer, you've got to display really good knowledge, but you've also got to display the skill of evaluation. Now, the most basic form of evaluation that's unlikely to get you more than a grade D or a grade E is evaluation through juxtaposition. This is where you simply display knowledge of different perspectives separately. So you might say something like, on the one hand, Marxists argue that the media reflects the views of its owners. On the other hand, there's the pluralist perspective that believes that the media reflects the views of its audience. So you're just displaying knowledge of different perspectives separately. Now, the problem with doing that is what you're implying is that all arguments, all perspectives have equal weight. You are not actually evaluating which particular argument seems to be the best one in terms of evidence and in terms of its logic. So stronger candidates go beyond juxtaposition and they will explicitly evaluate the arguments that they present. So they directly compare and contrast perspectives. They use one theory to directly criticise another, and they explicitly discuss what they consider to be the strengths and the weaknesses of the main arguments that they present. Now, one way of making sure that your answer contains good knowledge and explicit evaluation is to really think about your paragraph structure. And I suggest that you use the following structure in the main body of your 35-mark question. So make sure that each paragraph starts with a clear identification of the point that you're going to discuss in your paragraph. Make sure that that point is explained fully and linked to sociological evidence. Make sure that what you're saying is explicitly linked back to the claim in the question, and then also make sure that you include some explicit evaluation of the arguments and evidence that you are presenting in the paragraph. So think about specific strengths or specific weaknesses of the argument that you're presenting. What you can see on the screen at the moment is a really good paragraph to a 35-mark question where the question was asking candidates to evaluate the view that the content of the media reflects the views of its owners. So it follows, I think, very nicely this particular structure. So hit the pause button and read through this paragraph carefully and have a look at how it follows this particular peel structure, which is a really effective way of maximising your mark. So you can see that it's colour-coded here. The red part of the answer is the point that they're introducing at the beginning of the paragraph. Then we've got clear explanation and evidence of that particular point developed. We've got a link back to the question, and then we've got some explicit criticism of this particular kind of argument. So this is where the candidate is really beginning to clearly demonstrate the skill of explicit evaluation, and that's the key to getting a really high grade. And what you can see on this slide are some useful words and phrases that you can use within your paragraphs to signpost the skill of explicit evaluation. And that explicit evaluation can be focusing on weaknesses and criticisms of viewpoints, but it might also be highlighting the strengths and advantages of particular arguments and forms of evidence. The final section of your 35-mark question is the conclusion. And as with the introduction, it can be useful, I think, practicing writing conclusions using particular templates or writing frameworks. And this one, I think, can help you write effective conclusions. Now, in addition to this screencast, I have another more general video that I've made that goes into much more detail about this 4-part essay structure that I've introduced in this particular video. So on my YouTube channel, if you go into the A-Level Sociology Component 1 media playlist and you go right to the bottom, you can watch that particular video, and I'd really recommend that you do before you sit the end of year exam. Now, the final section of the end of year exam covers the methods topic, and here you'll have 2 5-mark questions and a 20-mark question, and you'll need to spend about 50 minutes of the exam on these questions. Here we can see the layout for this particular section of the exam. So there's a bit of text to read, and generally this will be a summary of a piece of sociological research, and then there are these 2 5-mark questions and a 20-mark question. Now, I'm not going to go through technique for this section of the exam in this particular video, because if you go back to the second of the 2 preparation videos that I made for the January mock exams, you'll find that this video goes through the methods questions and the technique that you'll need for this section of the exam in lots and lots of detail. So even if you watch this video in preparation for the January mock exam, I really suggest that you go back and watch it again, and you can find this if you go onto my YouTube channel and look at the Methods of Sociological Inquiry playlist, and again it's right at the bottom.